1 year ago, a lifetime away, my teacher had stood defiant, a human barricade against the very notion of safety, as a real school shooting unfolded around us. I can still see her, starkly outlined against the classroom's fluorescent glare, actively blocking the light switch even as the chilling pops and bangs of gunshots drew inexorably closer. When I, a terrified, trembling kid, had dared to beg her, pleaded with every fiber of my being to let us simply hide, to take cover, her response had been a cold, unyielding ultimatum: sit down, or you're expelled. What does one say to such callous indifference in the face of imminent death? I could only stare, a silent, hollow echo of disbelief in my chest. And then, last week, an unexpected, almost surreal piece of news pierced through the lingering trauma. She was led out of her apartment, handcuffed, a poignant, if belated, sense of justice settling in. This past week, the memory of that day resurfaced with brutal clarity. I was nestled in the familiar hum of Miss Brown's AP history class, a sanctuary of ancient empires and forgotten wars, when the PA system, usually reserved for mundane announcements, crackled to life with a chilling urgency. Lockdown, lockdown, this is not a drill. 100 times since kindergarten, we've rehearsed this ritual, a macabre dance of survival. Lights off. Hide in the corner. Stay absolutely quiet, simple. Instinctively, our bodies remembered the choreography, a collective ripple of movement starting to spread through the room. But Miss Brown, a formidable figure whose authority was as unshakable as the pyramids we were studying, stepped forward, her gaze sharp as a Roman spear, pinning us in place. It was that look, the one that materialized whenever her unquestioned dominion was even implicitly challenged. Get back to your desks now, she commanded, her voice honed to an edge that left no room for negotiation. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. Out of sheer ingrained habit, a reflex born of years of classroom etiquette, my hand shot up. But Miss Brown, I ventured, my voice wavering slightly, we're supposed to. Before I could even articulate the collective understanding of school safety protocols, she cut me off. Her words of whip crack across the room. The only procedures you follow are mine. A beat of chilling silence. Then the ultimate student deterrent. Sit down, or you're all getting zeros on your presentations. And with that, she launched into her infamous "I've been teaching for 25 years" speech. It was a well-worn sermon on respect, on how her generation, apparently forged from sterner stuff, didn't require constant hand-holding, a thinly veiled jab at our perceived fragility. To truly understand the unfolding horror, one had to grasp the peculiar universe of Miss Brown's classroom. She was one of those teachers, meticulously strict about the most bizarre, inconsequential minutiae, yet ironically, almost disdainfully lazy about the actual craft of teaching. You could be marked absent for being a mere 30 seconds late, a draconian punishment for a minor infraction. Yet she'd effortlessly bestow A's on entire stacks of essays she obviously hadn't even skimmed. Once, purely as an experiment, a perverse test of her superficial grading, I submitted a history paper with an entire, wholly irrelevant paragraph dedicated to SpongeBob SquarePants inserted right in the middle. The result, a stellar 98. So, understanding her capricious nature and valuing our hard-earned GPAs above all else, most of us, after a moment's internal debate, reluctantly settled back into our desks. Why risk academic ruin over what was, in all likelihood, just another poorly timed, annoying drill? But then, a chilling echo. The PA system crackled again, and the announcement, imbued with a new, terrifying urgency, repeated, "Code red. This is a code red. All staff and students follow lockdown procedures immediately." A cold wave washed over me, a visceral jolt. This was different. In drills, they announced it once, a fleeting directive. This repetition, this insistent demand, it never happened. My stomach tightened, churning with that familiar, sickening flip I got before a massive test I hadn't studied for. Except this was infinitely, terrifyingly worse. My eyes darted to the door, then to the hallway, where the harsh fluorescent light still blazed, an unsettling beacon in the face of impending darkness. In every drill, teachers killed the lights immediately, plunging their rooms into safe shadows. Miss Brown's classroom, however, remained exposed, blindingly bright. Then I heard it, a series of distinct pops, sharp and percussive, like firecrackers, but lacking any festive cheer. Simultaneously, a symphony of dread erupted as everyone's phone started buzzing at once. I fumbled for mine, pulling it out discreetly under my desk. My boyfriend, Tyler, was in chemistry, 2 halls over. His text message, stark and misspelled, made my blood run to ice. Hiding in supply closet. Someone has a gum. Where are you? A chilling flood of other texts followed, painting a fragmented picture of chaos. Behind filing cabinet in main office, under Mr. Garcia's desk. With desperate hope, I showed Miss Brown my phone, the screen a glaring testament to real terror. My boyfriend says there's someone with it. Before I could even utter the word gun, she cut me off, her eyes narrowing. I see what's happening here. You think you can stage some elaborate prank to get me in trouble? Get me fired. Her egocentric delusion was terrifying. The popping sounds were undeniably getting louder now, closer. Each percussive report sending a jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins. Then, a sound that shredded the last vestiges of normalcy, a scream from the hallway. Not a playful shriek, not the excited cry of kids running wild, but a raw, guttural sound choked with primal terror. That's probably drama class practicing, Ms. Brown offered, her voice betraying a hint of forced bravado, a flicker of uncertainty even she couldn't suppress. Across the hall, through the narrow pane of glass in our door, I could see Mr. Peterson's classroom. It was dark, absolutely no movement. Just an unnerving, profound darkness where 20 students should have been. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely type. Henderson won't let us hide. Still at desks. Tyler, what? Get to safety now. Ben, sweet Ben, the quietest kid, who never argued with anyone, tried next. Ms. Brown, please, he pleaded, his voice cracking. This feels real. Her response was immediate, unyielding, an ice-cold dismissal of his very real fear. Feelings aren't facts. Ben, sit down. More running in the hallway, the rapid patter of many feet, all heading in the same frantic direction away from something, away from someone. The PA system, our fragile link to the outside, crackled once more, then died mid-word, severing our last connection to official reassurance. That's when we heard them, the shots. No longer mere pops, bang, 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 each report concussive, shattering, not like a metal door slamming, but sharper, infinitely louder, brutally real. My chair scraped against the linoleum with a defiant shriek as I stood up. We need to hide now, I commanded, my voice infused with a raw, untamed instinct. Sit down, or you're expelled. Miss Brown's rigid body became a human shield over the light switch, her last bastion of control. I will not lose my job because you children want to play games. Something in me snapped, a cold, clear fury. I don't care, I declared, the words of primal roar, and sprinted for the light. That's when the carefully constructed dam of obedience broke. Half the class, released from Miss Brown's spell, surged towards the safe corner, driven by sheer survival instinct. The other half, paralyzed by a lifetime of following rules, froze at their desks, caught in a terrifying tug-of-war between ingrained deference and that screaming, animalistic voice within. Shrieking danger, Miss Brown lunged, grabbing at my arm as I passed, but I yanked away, adrenaline surging. She was still yelling, a broken record of disrespect and consequences, her voice shrill with hysteria. You're all being hysterical. This paranoia is exactly what social media has done to you. Manufactured fear, but we weren't listening anymore. Her words, once formidable, were now nothing but a desperate, pathetic drone. Desks scraped frantically across the linoleum, a desperate symphony of effort, as we pushed and shoved them to barricade the door. The air thickened with the guttural sounds of fear-muffled sobs from one corner, whispered, urgent prayers from another. The kids who'd frozen finally jolted into action, scrambled over, cramming into our shared corner, 23 terrified teenagers trying to become utterly invisible. Everyone, that is, except Miss Brown. She stood at her desk, a defiant, almost grotesque sentinel, arms crossed, fury radiating off her like a palpable, suffocating heat. Then a chilling sound. The doorknob rattled. Everyone stopped breathing. A collective gasp that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. The handle turned, then, miraculously, a click. Locked. Thank God. Locked. A raw, primal scream of gratitude, though none dared make a sound. A dark, shifting shadow passed under the door, paused, a terrifying, silent presence. We could hear breathing on the other side. Or perhaps that was just the frantic drumming of my own heart in my ears, amplified by terror, footsteps, moving on. Those were the longest 10 seconds of my life. The SWAT team found us 40 minutes later, their entry a cacophony of heavily armed, helmeted figures that nevertheless brought a wave of immense relief. Miss Brown, unbelievably, was still muttering about how we'd overreacted to a simple drill, her voice a broken record of self-justification. A week later, the lingering question of why finally found its gruesome answer. That's when they told us who the shooter was, Jake Wilson, Jake from my sophomore English class. The quiet kid who always sat in the back corner, his head often bowed, lost in a world of intricate anime characters sketched meticulously in his notebook. The world outside felt strangely muted, discolored, as the paramedic wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, the cool plastic a strange contrast to the warmth of the May afternoon. I sat on the gurney, my entire body seized by an uncontrollable tremor, a deep, bone-rattling chill, as if I had hypothermia. She kept checking my pulse, asking if I could breathe okay, if I felt dizzy, but all I could truly focus on was the phantom image of Jake walking past our door. Jake with a gun. Jake, who I'd lent a pencil to just last week, a mundane act now laden with a horrifying, grotesque significance. Detective Santos, her badge glinting, a stark symbol of authority and investigation, showed up with her notebook. She crouched down to my eye level, her gaze steady and compassionate, asking me to walk her through everything that had happened in Miss Brown's room. I recounted the grim tableau, the initial, alarming crackle of the PA, Miss Brown's chilling, resolute insistence that we remain exposed at our desk, her voice cutting through the rising terror. And then, the escalating, horrifying cacophony of sounds that redefined our world. The lens of memory brought the scene into sharper focus, each detail clicking into place with unnerving clarity. The detective, her notepad resting open on her knee, meticulously transcribed every word. Her head inclining in a silent acknowledgement when I recounted the critical moment I took the initiative to switch off the lights. The world outside, just moments after the school doors had reopened, was a jarring symphony of disarray. The parking lot, usually a predictable mosaic of sedans and minivans, had become a churning maelstrom of frantic parents, their faces etched with terror, running aimlessly, desperately searching. News vans, like predatory birds, were already setting up their satellite dishes, their cameras swiveling, hungry for the raw grief. Ambulances, their sirens wailing like tortured banshees, sped away, carrying untold futures. Then a sudden, visceral force. Mom, still in her pale green hospital scrubs, their sterile cleanliness a stark contrast to the smudged black trails of mascara streaking down her face. tore through the yellow police tape as if it were mere spider silk. She seized me, her grip so fierce it squeezed the breath from my lungs, pulling me into a desperate, bone-crushing embrace. Her hands, trembling, traced every contour of my face, my arms, a frantic, almost ritualistic search for injuries that mercifully weren't there, her voice a raw, choked demand for answers. How? She shrieked at Detective Santos, her words a hammer blow. How could a teacher leave children exposed, vulnerable, during an active shooter incident nearby? Tyler's mom mirrored her anguish, a relentless cycle of sobs and tight hugs, while Tyler himself stood in her arms, utterly still, his eyes wide and vacant, as if his soul had momentarily detached. Detective Santos, her expression a steady in contained urgency, guided me to a less frenzied corner of the lot. She produced her tablet, the screen a glowing portal to the past, displaying screenshots of the text I'd sent Tyler those frantic, first messages about Ms. Brown's inexplicable refusal to let us take cover. 23 students, she stated, her voice a low, chilling current, have already corroborated your account. Miss Brown, they all say, kept insisting it was a drill, a hoax, even as the guttural thump-thump of gunshots began to echo, undeniably real. Through the hallways, a new wave of cold bread washed over me as she delivered the stark truth. 2 children died in the math hallway. 3 more are currently at the hospital, all of them from classrooms that, unlike ours, followed active shooter protocol immediately. All, that is, except for one girl who was grazed by a bullet that managed to pierce through a door, a terrifying testament to how quickly life can unravel. Just then, Dad materialized, a silent, comforting anchor in the surging tide of emotion. He seamlessly took over from Mom, whose shoulders sagged with the sudden release of her fierce grip, and wordlessly led me towards his truck. The drive home was shrouded in a heavy, communal silence, the radio a dark, unlit screen. We both flinched, a simultaneous, involuntary spasm, when a motorcycle, its engine a sudden, explosive roar, shot past us at a red light, shattering the fragile quiet. Our house, paradoxically, felt alien, its comforting normality familiar scent of Dad's brewing coffee mingling with the fresh scent of laundry detergent a jarring anachronism. Dad, in a quiet act of normalcy, made spaghetti, with the food set and touched on my plate, a bland landscape I merely pushed around with my fork. My phone, a relentless digital cicada, buzzed incessantly, a barrage of messages from friends, from acquaintances, all asking the same bewildered, urgent question. Why didn't Miss Brown let us hide? That night, sleep was an unreachable shore. My mind, a relentless projector, replayed those agonizing 40 minutes, a leap of terror and confusion. The next morning, an automated voice, devoid of human warmth, crackled through our phone from the district office. School was canceled indefinitely. Counselors, the voice assured us, would be available at the community center, a hollow comfort. Mom, her resolve unbroken, called in sick, determined to stay home with me, but I found myself locking my bedroom door, seeking refuge in the solitude. I sat on my bed, the silence a canvas for haunting what-ifs, how we almost didn't barricade, how we almost remained frozen at our desks, just as Miss Brown had so adamantly demanded. Channel 8, ever the harbinger of calamity, had our school emblazoned across every commercial break, a morbid monument, and then Ms. Brown's face, unnervingly composed, filled the screen, broadcasting from her own driveway. She told the reporter, with an almost defiant confidence, that she had maintained absolute control during the chaos, that her students were alive because she hadn't panicked. Mom, a guttural cry escaping her lips, snatched the remote and hurled it with such force that it struck the television, splintering the screen into a jagged web of cracks. Soon after, Tyler sent me a link, a cell phone video from Mr. Peterson's dark classroom. The footage showed everyone huddled, hidden, and utterly silent, while Ms. Brown's voice, chillingly clear, carried through the thin walls, her words about manufactured fear echoing like a perverse mantra. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it. 2:47 p.m., the precise moment she was captured on video blocking the light switch. The video, a raw testament to truth, amassed 50,000 views in just 2 hours, and the comments section was a savage, unfiltered torrent of rage. I spent the entirety of the following day holed up in my room, a prisoner to my own heightened senses, flinching, jumping, at every innocent creak of the house, every distant slam of a car door outside. Mom brought me soup, its comforting aroma failing to penetrate the icy barrier of my appetite. It sat untouched. The group chat on my phone, meanwhile, pulsed with a relentless stream of message whispers of lawyers and lawsuits, the cold, hard language of legal retribution. But the words blurred, my mind unable to grasp their weight. That evening, Principal Foster called, his voice a practiced, careful cadence, the kind he reserved for delicate conversations. The district, he explained, required my written statement regarding Ms. Brown's actions, a statement separate from the ongoing police investigation. Before I could even formulate a response, Mom seized the phone, her voice sharper, clearer than his. He will provide his statement through our attorney, she declared, a pronouncement that was news to me, for I hadn't yet grasped that we were navigating this new, treacherous landscape with legal counsel. The next morning, Ben's mom pulled up in her car, Ben's pale face a window to his internal turmoil. He needed to talk, she explained, to someone who had been there, someone who truly understood the ineffable horror. We settled onto my front porch, the morning sun a pale imitation of warmth. Ben kept starting sentences, fragments of trauma, unable to complete them, about almost staying in his seat, about the terrifying abyss of what if I hadn't turned off those lights. His hands trembled, a mirror image of my own, a shared tremor of lingering shock. Later that afternoon, Tyler's parents dropped him off, and we gravitated instinctively towards the backyard, to the weathered picnic table beneath the sheltering canopy of the old oak tree. Tyler, with a quiet solemnity, rolled up his jeans, revealing dark purple bruises blossoming across both his knees, tangible price of wedging himself behind the precarious chemical storage shelves in that claustrophobic supply closet. His voice, remarkably flat, devoid of inflection, recounted how the gunshots had grown steadily closer, a relentless, terrifying march, and how he knew I was just 2 halls away, utterly helpless to intervene. We sat there for an hour, suspended in a shared silence, not really talking about it, yet unable to talk about anything else either. His fingers unconsciously picking at the splintered wood of the table, a tiny, repetitive gesture of a mind still grappling with the unthinkable. Day 5 dawned, Mom already on the phone, her voice a determined hum as she scheduled a flurry of appointments. By noon, she had located Rebecca Thompson, a lawyer whose reputation preceded her, a specialist in the labyrinthine world of school safety cases. Her downtown office, a testament to her dedication, had newspaper clippings plastered across every available wall space, sensational headlines detailing negligence lawsuits, exposing glaring safety violations at schools stretching across the entire state. Rebecca, her gaze astute, meticulously reviewed Mom's notes, then leaned back, her voice firm. "What, Ms. Brown did," she stated, cutting through the emotional fog with clinical precision, went far beyond poor judgment. Keeping students exposed during an active shooter situation, under these circumstances, constitutes criminal endangerment. She paused, her eyes narrowing. "There's something profoundly unsettling about Ms. Brown's persistent insistence that this entire incident was fake, even as those gunshots resonated, undeniable, through the very halls of the school. What deeply ingrained conviction, what profound illusion, leads a teacher to believe that actual, tangible danger isn't real, especially when every other classroom in the building is already dark, silent, and hidden?" She then explained the legal landscape. Other families were already initiating civil suits, seeking compensation for their profound losses, but criminal charges, those, she clarified, would rest solely with the district attorney's office. The community meeting on day 6, held at the Civic Center, devolved into utter chaos almost the instant Ms. Brown walked through the doors, flanked by her union representative, a stoic guardian. A collective gasp, then a torrent of raw, furious screams erupted from the assembled parents, yet Ms. Brown remained eerily calm, her face maintaining the exact same controlled, almost detached expression she had worn during the shooting. Mechanically repeating her mantra, that she had simply followed her professional judgment. In a surge of frustrated rage, someone hurled a water bottle, which struck the wall behind her with a sharp thwack, narrowly missing her. Security guards immediately converged, forming a protective cordon around her, physically escorting her back outside into the tumultuous night. That very night, the detective called again, and her question sent an icy tendril of dread through my entire body. She wanted to know if Ms. Brown had ever mentioned Jake Wilson in class, given that he had been her student 3 years prior. Jake Wilson. The name was already circulating, a shadowy presence known through hushed whispers and frantic group texts. A name the news, for reasons yet unstated, refused to utter. Day 7, morning. I finally wrestled myself out of the suffocating inertia that had held me captive for days, forcing my leaden limbs towards the shower, shedding the stale, clinging layers of clothing that felt more like a second skin of anxiety. In the kitchen, a semblance of ordinary life persisted. Dad, a steadfast anchor in our turbulent reality, stood by the stove, meticulously flipping pancakes. Their sweet, golden aroma usually a comforting harbinger of a peaceful Sunday. But then, the sharp, unexpected rearing of the doorbell cleaved through the fragile quiet, causing both of us to visibly recoil, our hearts vaulting into our throats in a collective gasp of terror. It was, thankfully, just the delivery guy, utterly oblivious to the storm raging within our walls, leaving a mundane package. Yet, that jarring, visceral jolt of panic, that agonizing split second of bracing for the worst, was chillingly, insidiously becoming our new, horrifying normal. How long could we endure living under such a constant, low-grade hum of dread? Later that evening, the television news, with a grim, almost preordained solemnity, finally gave official voice to the dread that had been seeping into every corner of our town. It confirmed what everyone had already, morbidly, pieced together. The perpetrator was Jake. His smiling yearbook photo, a stark, anachronistic relic from his graduation, flashed on the screen the face of a quiet kid I vaguely remembered, a fleeting shadow from my freshman year. Now cruelly immortalized, but the broadcast wasn't done delivering its gut-wrenching blows. The anchor, with a measured gravity that amplified the impact, then dropped the real bombshell. Wilson, a detached, almost clinical reference to Jake had, in fact, filed a formal complaint against veteran teacher Patricia Brown 3 years prior, alleging severe psychological abuse. 3 years. The words hung heavy, sickeningly potent. Why, we all wondered, had this explosive revelation only surfaced now, amidst such devastating, irreparable loss? The moment those words left the anchor's lips, our living room erupted into a whirlwind of frantic, purposeful action. Mom, her face a mask of resolute determination, instinctively snatched up her phone, her fingers already flying across the keypad, dialing our lawyer, Rebecca, seeking immediate legal counsel. Dad, meanwhile, with a grin set to his jaw, hunched over his laptop, his gaze racing through endless online archives, hunting for any digital breadcrumb, any faint, official trace of Jake's alleged complaint. Hours later, in the digital labyrinth of forgotten public records, a chilling discovery emerged, a cryptic line in a school board meeting transcript from 2021, detailing a sealed student complaint against staff, The dates meticulously corresponded with the timeline of Jake's complaint, a perfect, unnerving alignment. Yet, conspicuously absent, like a ghost in the machine, was Miss Brown's name, a glaring omission that screamed of deliberate concealment. How could such a significant formal accusation simply vanish into administrative obscurity, only to resurface under such horrific circumstances? Day 8 arrived, heavy with the oppressive weight of unresolved trauma and escalating questions. Tyler, a silent, comforting presence, picked me up, and without exchanging a single word, we simply drove, our destination an abandoned, desolate mall parking lot. The engine off, the air thick with unspoken dread, we sat there amidst the rows of empty spaces, the only sound the quiet thrumming of our own racing hearts. His hands, coiled tight around the steering wheel, were stark white, his knuckles bloodless under the strain of an unspoken fury. Finally, the words tore from him, raw and ragged. She knew. Miss Brown, she had to know it might be him. All the warning signs, all the complaints, and she still kept us all trapped, exposed, like sitting ducks. His voice was laced with a chilling mixture of despair and incandescent rage. How could a teacher, entrusted with our very lives, have been so willfully blind, so utterly negligent? Meanwhile, our class group chat, once a forum for memes and mundane homework questions, now buzzed incessantly with a new, somber purpose. Then, ever the diligent gatherer of information, began flooding it with disquieting revelations his parents had painstakingly unearthed. Their investigation had led them to 3 other students from Jake's graduating class, all of whom distinctly recalled Miss Brown having it out for him, a chillingly consistent sentiment that painted a disturbing picture. One girl, Melissa, specifically recounted how Miss Brown had failed Jake on a flimsy, almost malicious technicality for his senior thesis, a misplaced footnote, perhaps, or a minor formatting error, a bureaucratic obstacle that had very nearly derailed his entire graduation. These convergent accounts, emanating from different sources, began to meticulously paint a clear, undeniable pattern, a disturbing, almost predatory tendency to target and systematically undermine specific students, Jake seemingly among her most prominent victims. Was this just strictness, or something far more sinister at play, a calculated act of psychological warfare? Day 9 dawned, marking a shift from frantic amateur detective work to the grim, official wheels of justice. A detective, her demeanor sharp and unyielding, arrived at our doorstep, a formidable court order for Miss Brown's complete personnel file clutched firmly in her hand, the paper rustling with the weight of its legal authority. With a somber gravity, she informed Mom, her voice low but piercing, "We found something significant." The implication hung heavy in the air. Jake, it turned out, was terrifyingly, tragically, not an isolated incident. Over her lengthy career, there had been 6 other formal complaints filed against Miss Brown, all of them meticulously sealed away. Minus one of them somehow resolved with an unsettling lack of any discernible disciplinary action. It was a pattern of unchecked power, a history of institutional silence and profound negligence. Then her gaze turned to me, unwavering and intense. "We need your detailed statement," she articulated, her voice firm, specifically about Miss Brown's exact words during the lockdown. Every single utterance, every instruction she gave while you and your classmates were begging her, pleading with her, to let you find a place to hide. The memory alone was a chilling echo, sending shivers down my spine, conjuring the terror of that confined space. I found myself seated at our kitchen table, the detective's stark, blank statement form a daunting expanse of white in front of me, my pen hovering uncertainly above the paper. In the background, the comforting, almost surreal gurgle of Mom making coffee attempted to create a veneer of normalcy that felt utterly out of reach. The very first line, simple in its instruction, asked for a description of events. I tentatively scrawled 3 words, then immediately, violently, crossed them out, started again. Another attempt, another swift, frustrated strike through. How, I wrestled with myself, do you adequately capture in mere words the chilling, almost imperceptible shift in someone's voice, that subtle inflection that betrays a mind so utterly entrenched in its own authority, so profoundly convinced of its infallibility, that it simply cannot conceive of being wrong? The detective, a picture of patient stoicism, waited silently as I grappled, attempting 6 different linguistic approaches to convey the horrifying tableau, Miss Brown, standing sentinel, her body literally blocking the crucial light switch, while the terrifying cadence of gunshots outside grew increasingly, inexorably closer. Eventually, I surrendered to the brutal simplicity of it all. I finally just wrote down precisely what she had said, and what she had done, step by agonizing step. No interpretations, no subjective opinions, just the unvarnished, irrefutable facts. Day 10. While I was attempting to swallow my breakfast, my phone vibrated with an insistent buzz, a news alert that yanked me back into the relentless cycle of unfolding tragedy. The headline proclaimed that the school board had, at last, placed Miss Brown on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. A flicker of something akin to relief, a faint hope for justice, sparked within me. But that fragile optimism was immediately extinguished as I scrolled down, past the official pronouncement, to the teachers' union statement, a furious rebuttal, decrying the decision as a rush to judgment against a dedicated educator with 25 years of unblemished service. The digital battlefield of the comment section was already ablaze, tallying over 300 posts, a stark, venomous divide. Half the commentators lionized her as a hero who had maintained order under impossible circumstances, while the other half clamored vociferously for her immediate arrest. "Stop reading!" Mom's sharp command cut through the noise as she snapped my laptop shut, her eyes mirroring my own rising anxiety. But it was too late. The damage was done. My full name had already flickered across the screen no less than 14 times, a stark, unwelcome reminder that I was now an unwilling, exposed participant in this public spectacle. That very afternoon, Principal Foster himself materialized at our front door, a ghost of his usual composed self, his face drawn and pale, his eyes bloodshot, looking as though sleep had utterly abandoned him for days. He sank onto our living room couch, not meeting our gaze, his eyes fixed instead on his clasped hands, as if seeking solace in their quiet stillness. He spoke to Mom in a low, somber tone, recounting the litany of complaints that had accumulated against Miss Brown over the years, a steady trickle of concerned parents describing her as too rigid, excessively harsh, unnecessarily punitive. But, he explained, his voice heavy with resignation, her formidable tenure and the consistently high test scores her students achieved had always acted as impenetrable shields, effectively neutralizing any attempts at disciplinary action. So, as he put it, nothing ever happened. The words were a damning indictment of the system itself. Then his voice, already strained, fractured completely, a raw, emotional tremor escaping him as he whispered the unbearable truth. The two kids who didn't make it out, in that moment, the full, devastating weight of the school's inaction, his own complicity, hung thick and suffocating in the air. Day 11 began with an almost literal explosion of notifications on my phone at 6 a.m., jolting me violently awake. Someone, with a chilling disregard for consequences, had leaked Yake's complete manifesto to an obscure news site, disseminating its toxic contents before the FBI could even begin to lock it down. It was 3 whole, meticulously typed pages, every word seething with a singular, terrifying focus, Miss Brown. He detailed, with obsessive precision, how she had deliberately failed him on his senior thesis not for lack of effort or understanding, but for the most Pickean of reasons, a single missing footnote. That solitary, vindictive grade, he claimed, had been the specific, insurmountable barrier that had ultimately barred him from acceptance into his dream college. And, most damningly, he recounted, with chilling specificity, how she had laughed a cruel, dismissive laugh when he had pleaded, begged for just one chance to rectify the minor oversight. The sheer, unsettling meticulousness of the details in that document made my skin crawl. Precise dates and times, verbatim conversations he had secretly recorded, all fussed, idiously compiled. Like a prosecutor building an unassailable case for why she, in his twisted perception, unequivocally deserved what was coming. That very night, our formidable lawyer, Rebecca, convened an emergency meeting, her voice resonating with urgent gravity. All 23 families whose children had been trapped in Miss Brown's classroom were crammed, shoulder to shoulder, into a suffocatingly small conference room at the Holiday Inn, the air thick with unspoken fear and burgeoning anger. Rebecca stood at the front, a stack of weighty legal papers clutched in her hands, her gaze sweeping across the agitated faces before her. Then, she dropped the ultimate bombshell, a revelation that detonated in the room with seismic force. The school district, in a shocking display of negligence, had been explicitly aware of Jake's dangerous, escalating fixation on Miss Brown for months. His therapist, to agonizing months before the shooting, had sent a formal, unambiguous warning to the district, detailing his alarming state of mind and his specific obsessions. The room instantly erupted. Parents surged forward, a cacophony of anguished shouts, choked sobs, and furious demands for answers echoing off the walls. Amidst the chaos, Rebecca, her voice strained but resolute, attempted to explain the intricate, often convoluted, nuances of mandatory reporting laws and the crushing weight of institutional liability. Day 12. The morning began with a sickening lurch as I woke to no less than 47 Instagram notifications, each one a sharp jab to my already frayed nerves. It turned out Miss Brown, with breathtaking audacity, had appeared on some obscure, ironically named podcast called Truth in Education, where she had spent a full hour meticulously crafting a narrative of herself as the beleaguered victim of woke culture and teenage hysteria. But the venom didn't stop there. She, in a chilling act of personal aggression, actually uttered my full name, portraying me as a troubled student with attendance issues, and, in an act of staggering cruelty, she audaciously twisted the sacred memory of my grandmother's funeral, transforming it into a baseless accusation that I had merely been skipping class for fun. The sycophantic host of the podcast, nodding along with infuriating certainty, echoed her sentiments, pontificating, kids today are soft, can't handle structure. They need safe spaces instead of real education. Within 2 frantic hours, Rebecca had filed a cease and desist order. But it was already a futile gesture. The episode had already been downloaded over 12,000 times, its toxic message spreading like wildfire. My Instagram feed, once a source of lighthearted connection, was now a cesspool of vitriol, swamped with messages from faceless strangers branding me a liar, an attention seeker, a crisis actor. Then, the harassment escalated to a terrifying new level. Someone, somehow, managed to unearth Mom's work number at the hospital, and the calls began flooding the nurse's station, asking, with chilling malice, if she was proud of raising a daughter who destroys teachers' lives. It's day 13. The world outside continued its relentless spin, but for Tyler and me, time felt suspended in a suffocating bubble of dread. He arrived at my house clutching a sleeping bag and simply settled onto my bedroom floor, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us, in our raw and exposed state, could bear the unbearable solitude any longer. We lay there in the oppressive darkness at 3 a.m., both wide awake, our eyes fixed on nothing in particular, the empty space above us mirroring the hollowness within. He kept going over that day, the day everything shattered, meticulously replaying every excruciating detail, trying to make sense of how he We could have pulled that blaring fire alarm from the chemistry room, a cacophony that might have scattered everyone into the crisp morning air long before Jake even began his rampage. How utterly surreal, how impossibly simple that solution now seemed to have evacuated every soul, every innocent student and unsuspecting teacher, before the first shot ever echoed. The what is gnawed at us, relentless, like famished wolves tearing at fresh prey, consuming us both from the inside out. Yet, no matter how many hypothetical scenarios we replayed, how many alternative timelines we conjured in our minds, there was absolutely nothing either of us could articulate that would alleviate the crushing weight of that agonizing regret. The very next morning, as if orchestrated by some unseen hand, M. Brown's husband, a smooth-talking real estate agent whose influence stretched across every leafy suburb and bustling commercial district in town, launched a GoFund campaign for her legal defense. It exploded, a digital wildfire, scorching past an astonishing $30,000 within a mere 6 hours. The campaign description, crafted with the precision of a seasoned PR professional, decried the entire situation as a witch hunt against a dedicated teacher. It featured carefully curated photographs, Ms. Brown beaming proudly at graduations, surrounded by former students who had ascended to the lofty heights of doctors and lawyers, meticulously omitting anyone who didn't quite fit this pristine narrative of academic success and professional triumph. Donations poured in, not just from local sympathizers, but from concerned citizens 3 states away, accompanied by vitriolic comments lamenting how liberals are destroying education, a clear testament to the deeply polarized fervor the situation had ignited. Day 14. The phone call came, a harbinger of fresh anxieties. Ben's mom, her voice a brittle, quivering wire stretched taut with fear, explained their decision to withdraw from the group legal action. Her words tumbled out, laced with a palpable terror, as she recounted how Ben's dad's construction company, a pillar of the local economy for decades, had just inexplicably lost 3 major lucrative contracts. We can't prove it's connected, she kept repeating, her voice barely a whisper, yet everyone in town understood the unspoken truth. Ms. Brown's brother-in-law wasn't just any developer. He ran the biggest, most influential development firm in town. And it was common knowledge he regularly golfed with at least half of the city council members, weaving a dense, impenetrable web of power and influence. The message, though unstated, was chillingly clear. Later that afternoon, a phantom-like presence, Daniel Harris from my grade, materialized at the coffee shop where I was trying to lose myself in the comforting anonymity of a textbook. His phone, a silent testament to his frantic urgency, was already clutched, trembling, in his hand as he slid into the seat directly across from me, his eyes wide with a desperate, almost unhinged intensity. He confessed, his voice a strained whisper, that during the harrowing events, he hadn't been in a classroom. Instead, he had been hiding, pressed almost impossibly flat behind the secretary's desk in the main office, a cramped, claustrophobic sanctuary from which he had a clear, unobstructed view of the security monitor, and without a moment's conscious thought, driven by some primal instinct to bear witness, he had recorded the entire terrifying ordeal on his phone. The video, though grainy with the imperfections of a hurried capture, was horrifyingly clear enough to discern Ms. Brown. 30 seconds after the initial, gut-wrenching shots reverberated through the halls. There she was, undeniably visible, walking, not running, not even bothering to duck. Just walking down the hallway as if it were any other mundane Tuesday between classes. This stark, unsettling calm was set against the backdrop of Mr. Peterson's door already barricaded with desks and chairs, and Mrs. Garcia, her face etched with terror, having her kids huddled, whimpering, under their desks. Right there, in front of my disbelieving eyes, Daniel, his fingers flying with such frantic speed that they kept fumbling, missing the buttons, forwarded the damning footage to Detective Santos. Day 15 dawned, bringing with it a reluctant return to therapy, a ritual I hadn't engaged in since the seismic upheaval of my parents' divorce back in middle school. Dr. Patel's office was a meticulously preserved relic of past anxieties, complete with the same stiff, fake plants, the ubiquitous beige walls that absorbed all color, and that ever-present white noise machine. It was designed to soothe, to muffle the outside world, but to me, it simply replicated the unnerving static of a dying radio, doing little to calm the tempest raging within. I recounted to her the lingering, indelible image of the shadow beneath the door, a terrifying vignette seared into my memory, and then there was Ms. Brown's voice, still echoing in the silent corridors of my mind, coolly dismissing our terror as hysterical even as desperate shouts and the chilling sounds of people dying resonated down the very hall. Dr. Patel listened, her gaze unwavering, her pen scratching methodically across her yellow pad, asking me, with a quiet urgency, to describe what I felt in my body, not just in my mind. When those horrific memories resurfaced, Daniel's video, a raw, unfiltered snapshot of truth, detonated on Twitter before dinner that very same day. By the stroke of midnight, the hashtag Brownie wasn't just trending. It was a digital wildfire, racking up an astonishing 40,000 retweets. People, collective digital sleuths, meticulously slowed the footage down, zooming in with forensic intensity, revealing the chilling detail of Ms. Brown nonchalantly checking her phone while other teachers, heroes in that horrifying moment, were desperately dragging terrified children into the dubious safety of their classrooms. The timestamp, a precise, irrefutable digital clock, stood as clear as day, unequivocally proving that this detached scene unfolded after the shooting had already begun. The immediate, inescapable consequence, news vans, like metallic vultures, descended upon Daniel's house, forcing his parents to whisk him away, a refugee from unwanted fame. to stay with his aunt in Boston. Day 16, Detective Santos summoned me to the station to view the footage again, this time alongside a specialist from the state. This woman, sharp-eyed and methodical, kept gesturing at the screen with the tip of her pen, a silent, pointed accusation. She meticulously demonstrated to me how Ms. Brown displayed absolutely no startled response when the shots first ripped through the air. There was no flicker of surprise in her eyes, no involuntary flinch, just this eerie, almost premeditated calm, a silent, chilling decision to simply keep walking. They're building a case for willful endangerment, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, which, if proven, could lead to up to 5 years in prison. Mom picked me up from the station, her face grim, and drove us directly to the district office. Without a moment's hesitation, she filled out the daunting paperwork to pull me out of school, to homeschool me, a protective gesture that felt both suffocating and profoundly comforting. Ms. Brown's unnerving stroll down the hall, a chilling tableau of composure amidst chaos, while other teachers heroically barricaded doors with whatever they could find. This, my mother later explained, was the kind of damning detail that made seasoned lawyers metaphorically rub their hands together with glee and insurance companies reluctantly reach for their checkbooks, preparing for the inevitable financial fallout. Mom took 3 weeks of her vacation time, precious days she had been meticulously saving for years, and looked me squarely in the eyes. I don't care about your college applications right now, she declared, her voice cracking with raw emotion. I care about you being alive, and there, in the quiet sanctity of our kitchen, as the pasta, forgotten, boiled over on the stove, we both succumbed to a shared, torrential release of tears. Day 17, Miss Brown's lawyer, a man using calculated charm and legal gravitas, staged a grand press conference on the courthouse steps. Flanking him, like carefully chosen props, stood 3 of her former students, impeccably dressed in suits, a silent testament to her supposed influence and success. One, now a state senator, pontificated eloquently about the dangers of rushing to judgment, dramatically vowing to investigate the investigation itself, implying a conspiracy of unfairness. Meanwhile, the lawyer, with a theatrical flourish, boldly claimed the video was docked for crude forgery and vociferously demanded an independent analysis, desperate to sow seeds of doubt. Tyler's parents, however, were not waiting for any of that legal theater to play out. That very same day, they swiftly transferred him to St. Mary's private school, his mom explaining, with a weary sigh of resignation, that they simply couldn't wait for the system to sort this out from his new, presumably safer, school. Tyler's texts became a constant stream, an incessant lifeline. He felt a gnawing guilt about leaving, even though I repeatedly urged him to go, to get out while he still had the chance. Our phones transformed into a vital connection, a fragile tether binding us together. We'd both wake up at 3 a.m., haunted by the ghosts of what happened, and instinctively text each other. Just a few quick words, simply to reassure ourselves that the other was still there. Still breathing, still alive. Day 18, sleep, that elusive bomb, continued to evade me. In the suffocating darkness of my room, restlessness drove me to my laptop, and I began a desperate, almost obsessive, Google search for Ms. Brown. Deep within the digital archives, I unearthed an old Reddit thread from 2019, innocently titled, "Who is your worst teacher?" The answer, chillingly consistent, emerged. 3 different accounts, entirely unconnected, mentioned her by name, detailing her insidious mind games and the disturbing pattern of how she would pick one student each year to torment, an annual psychological crucifixion. The thread itself had long since been deleted, a desperate attempt to erase history, but the internet, an unforgiving keeper of secrets, had preserved a cached version on the Wayback Machine. With trembling fingers, I took screenshots of everything, a digital ledger of her dark past, and promptly dispatched it all to our lawyer. Day 19, the school board meeting was not merely contentious. It erupted into absolute, unbridled chaos. Parents, their raw emotions boiling over, started screaming at each other across the packed auditorium, the air thick with accusation and righteous fury. Roughly half of them, driven by a thirst for immediate justice, demanded Miss Brown's swift arrest. The other half, however, saw her as a scapegoat, an innocent victim of circumstance, with one woman, her face contorted with passion, shrieking that Ms. Brown had saved those kids by maintaining order. Ben's dad, despite his family's forced withdrawal from the lawsuit, rose from his seat, a picture of defiant outrage, and bellowed back, his voice echoing through the cacophony, that she had nearly got them all killed. The scene devolved into such a volatile maelstrom that security personnel had to forcibly clear the entire room, even as angry parents continued pushing and shoving, their grievances spilling out into the parking lot. The very next morning, Rebecca Harris, Daniel's mom, filed for a restraining order. Ms. Brown's more fervent supporters, a chilling, almost cult-like faction, had begun showing up at our houses, a clear act of intimidation, silently taking photos of our front doors, a visual threat that felt like a violation of our last vestiges of peace and safety, and brazenly posting them online, some even explicitly listing our home addresses. The sheer violation felt like a physical blow. It was a targeted campaign of intimidation designed to make us feel exposed and vulnerable in our own homes. Yet, the judge, with an almost chilling detachment, maintained that without direct, overt threats, such actions fell under the umbrella of free speech. Rebecca, whose anguish was palpable, sat in the sterile courtroom, her shoulders shaking, tears silently tracing paths down her face as the judge blandly elucidated that merely taking pictures from public property, even of private residences, wasn't technically illegal. It was a stark, infuriating lesson in the cold, hard letter of the law, utterly divorced from the searing reality of our fear. That same night, sleep remained an elusive phantom. I found myself trapped in a relentless cycle of scrolling through my phone, a digital purgatory of comments and articles, each one a fresh stab of injustice. The overwhelming majority seemed to echo the judge's sentiment, defending Ms. Brown, portraying her as a victim of an overzealous community, somehow even a hero. The sheer volume of support, the blind loyalty, was baffling, sickening. The clock hands crawled past 3 a.m. when, amidst the suffocating silence of my room and the buzzing hum of the phone, something inside me just snapped. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a cold, steely resolve that cut through the haze of grief and frustration. I lunged for my laptop, its screen a sudden beacon in the dark, and began pulling up the raw audio recordings from that day, the very ones the news outlets had reluctantly released, snippets drowned out by their own commentary. The full, unedited timeline of events, once shrouded in mystery, was now public record, laid bare by the relentless, painstaking investigation. I meticulously, almost obsessively, cinched up Ms. Brown's exact, unwavering words with the horrifying, undeniable sounds of gunshots echoing relentlessly in the background. My makeshift studio consisted of my phone propped precariously against my desk lamp, casting an intimate, dramatic glow. I hit record. My voice, surprisingly steady at first, began to read from the official transcript, each word a hammer blow of truth. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today, bang. The sharp, metallic crack of a gunshot reverberated, amplified by my laptop speakers, a ghostly echo of that terrible day. Sit down or you're all getting zeros, bang, bang. My hands were visibly shaking now, a tremor that ran through my entire body, yet I kept going, my voice rising in a fierce and yielding crescendo, reciting every single chilling thing she uttered. Every dismissive, authoritarian command, while mere yards down the hall, children were dying. The brutal juxtaposition of her callous words against the chaotic symphony of violence was undeniable, sickening. When I finally posted the video to TikTok at 4:17 a.m., the digital world felt vast and indifferent. I genuinely didn't expect anything beyond a few sympathetic comments, perhaps a handful of shares from friends. By noon, however, the numbers were staggering. 2 million views and climbing, a tidal wave of outrage and shared grief. The video had become a raw, unfiltered testament, tearing through the carefully constructed narratives. And then, a ripple effect, other kids from school, emboldened by seeing one of their own speak out, started making their own videos, a powerful cascade of collective memory. They showed what their teachers had done, painting a stark, heroic contrast to Ms. Brown's inaction. Mrs. Garcia, our fiery Spanish teacher, had every student scrambling under desks, a well-oiled machine of self-preservation. In an astonishing 8 seconds flat, Mr. Peterson, ever the pragmatist, had his entire class packed into the storage closet, a safe, cramped haven, even before the second announcement flared. Coach Williams, a man of quiet strength, literally, physically, carried 2 freshmen who had frozen in sheer terror, gently depositing them into the equipment room. A sanctuary of padded mats and hidden strength. Every single teacher, it became searingly clear, every one of them except Ms. Brown had managed to get their students hidden, safe, within a heroic 30 seconds. The hashtags exploded, a wildfire across every social media platform, creating a dichotomy that burned through the public consciousness. Teachers' instance showcased the incredible, selfless heroes who instinctively protected their charges, a flood of stories of courage and swift action. In stark contrast, Branch's second trial starkly revealed the cold, chilling reality of our classroom, students still sitting obediently at their desks, paralyzed by a teacher's authority, while the deafening echoes of gunshots drew inexorably closer. It was a battle of narratives, played out in real time on our screens, and the truth, raw and visceral, was finally prevailing. That night, around 2 a.m., a frantic knock jolted me awake. It was Tyler, standing on my porch like a ghost, unexpected and unannounced. His eyes were wide and haunted, his breath shallow. His mom, her face edged with exhaustion and worrying, had found him in his bathroom, gripped by a debilitating panic attack. And without a moment's hesitation, she'd driven him straight to my house. We didn't exchange many words. We simply sat together in the quiet sanctuary of my driveway, illuminated only by the faint, nascent glow of dawn, sharing earbuds, losing ourselves in old playlists from before everything changed. Before the innocence was shattered, he kept whispering the same thing over and over, a broken mantra. It wasn't our fault. It wasn't our fault, a desperate prayer for absolution and understanding. The very next morning, the district attorney's office called a press conference, a somber, formal affair that finally brought official validation to our suffering. The charges were read aloud, 23 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor, 1 for each student in our class. A singular, damning indictment for every life she had so carelessly jeopardized. Ms. Brown, ever the performer, turned herself in, not in shame or humility, but in a crisp navy suit, all her teaching awards meticulously pinned to her jacket like medals of honor, a defiant, almost grotesque display of self-aggrandizement. The ubiquitous news cameras, hungry for every shred of drama, caught every single second as she ascended those courthouse steps, her chin held unnaturally high, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, a smile that curdled my stomach with its chilling blend of arrogance and control. Her bail hearing unfolded that very afternoon, a mere formality. It seemed, as the judge said it, at a seemingly modest $50,000. Her network of supporters, a fiercely loyal and disturbingly efficient machine, had a GoFund page active and buzzing with donations even before she'd finished being processed. The speed was astonishing, sickening. 2 hours and 17 minutes was all it took to raise the full amount. She walked out of that courthouse, the same unsettling smile still plastered on her face, and, in a calculated move, stopped directly in front of the hungry cameras. One Ms. Brown, with an almost theatrical flourish, began to speak about vindication and control. A raw, uncontrollable scream threatened to tear from my throat. My mom, anticipating my visceral reaction, had to grab both my arms, her grip tight and firm, physically dragging me back to the car, away from the infuriating spectacle. The victims' families, a growing circle of shared grief and silent understanding, began meeting at the community center on Wednesdays. It was meant to be a space for healing, for solidarity, but I simply couldn't make myself go. The thought of reliving those moments, of hearing others recount their horror, was too much. Mom went instead, every single time, returning home with eyes that were always a little red and puffy, though she'd never once shed a tear in front of me. She would just hold me extra tight, a silent, comforting embrace that spoke volumes, and never say a word about what she'd heard or felt there. Then, a surprising text from Ben. It was a photo of something his mom had unearthed while meticulously cleaning out old PTA files from her garage. Jake Wilson's junior year essay. Scrawled all over it, in Ms. Brown's signature, furious red pen, were comments that were not just critical, but brutal. The essay, to my amateur eye, looked perfectly adequate, but her notes were merciless, dissecting every sentence, raging about lazy thinking and disappointing effort. At the very bottom, in her flawlessly elegant, almost artistic handwriting, she penned a chilling note about discussing his future in her course, a veiled threat subtly woven into a seemingly innocuous academic critique. Detective Santos called me the very next day. Her voice, usually self-clipped and professional, sounded noticeably tired, weighed down by the grim realities of her work. They had uncovered 6 more complaints against Ms. Brown, stretching back an astonishing 15 years, all of them from male students, and every single one of them meticulously detailing what the parents consistently referred to as psychological manipulation. What sickened me most was the detective's follow-up. Every single one of those complaints, a clear pattern of abuse, had been quietly dropped after closed-door meetings with administration, buried and forgotten. This, she informed me with a sigh, wasn't unusual in cases like this, a statement that left me with a bitter taste of institutional complicity. The news broke like a bombshell. Principal Foster resigned at an emergency press conference that absolutely no one had anticipated. He stood at that podium, a solitary figure under the harsh lights, and in an act of astonishing, almost unprecedented public humility, actually admitted he had failed us. He confessed that Ms. Brown should have been removed years ago, but he, in a moment of devastating candor, chose the easy path instead. The reporters, usually so cynical and jaded, seemed genuinely shocked that someone, for once, was actually taking responsibility. It was a rare, almost disorienting moment of accountability in a world that often seemed devoid of it. Just 2 days later, the audacity reached new heights. Ms. Brown's lawyer, a formidable legal strategist, filed a countersuit against the school district, demanding a staggering $5 million. Their argument, a brazen attempt to shift blame, claimed the district was unfairly scapegoating her for their own systemic security failures. My phone buzzed with the news alert as I sat in my therapist's waiting room, staring blankly at a faded painting of a serene landscape. The sheer unmitigated gall of it all was so outrageous, so profoundly absurd, that I actually laughed out loud, a harsh, unexpected bark of disbelief that startled the receptionist. The next day, Rebecca, ever the quiet leader, called another meeting at the community center. This time, all 23 families showed up, a unified front of simmering rage and determined resolve. She stood at the front of the room, stacks of neatly organized papers fanned out before her, and began handing them out, her voice clear and unwavering. She explained, with a newfound steel in her eyes, that we were no longer simply defending ourselves. We were going on the offensive. We were filing formal criminal complaints with the State Board of Education and, even more significantly, launching a federal civil rights lawsuit. A direct challenge to the system that had allowed this to happen. Parents, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and grim determination, began signing papers, exchanging phone numbers, a network of shared purpose forming before my eyes. As Rebecca's assistant meticulously typed notes on her laptop, documenting every step of our collective fight for justice. That night, sleep remained an unwelcome stranger. My mind, a whirlwind of legal jargon and painful memories, refused to quiet, so I did what felt instinctively right. I found an old, worn notebook, its pages yellowed with time, tucked away in my desk drawer, and I started writing everything, every single word Ms. Brown had uttered during those excruciating 47 minutes. I painstakingly committed to the page. The chilling detail of how she had deliberately blocked the light switch, plunging the room into a false sense of security. How she had coldly threatened us with zeros and expulsion. Academic punishments that seemed utterly trivial, even obscene, while the terrifying sounds of gunshots grew closer and closer, her voice a chilling counterpoint to the impending doom. Dr. Patel, my therapist, had often told me that writing helps process trauma, a comforting, therapeutic notion. But as I filled page after page with her damning words, her cruel actions, it felt less like processing grief and more like meticulously, painstakingly building a case. 3 days later, my phone, a constant companion in this unfolding drama, started blowing up with notifications. A new website had launched, an unexpected, powerful development. A group of Ms. Brown's former students, a collective of silent sufferers from years past, had created something called Survivors of Room 203. I clicked the link, my heart pounding. And what I saw was a torrent, testimonial after testimonial pouring in, a downbreaking 37 stories in the first few days alone. Students from a decade ago, their voices echoing through the years, describing the exact same tactics. Public humiliation when you dared to question her authority. Grades mysteriously plummeting if you challenged her iron-fisted control. Insidious mind games designed to make you doubt your own sanity, your own perceptions. The pattern, chillingly consistent, heartbreakingly clear, was finally laid bare for everyone to see. A local reporter had already reached out. It wasn't my decision to be in the spotlight, the media circus found me. My mom's voice, usually so steady and reassuring, had an unfamiliar tremor when she called, asking, almost pleadingly, if I was ready to face the cameras, to share my harrowing account with the world. The heat of the studio lights was oppressive, and my palms grew clammy, my hands trembling visibly as the red light on the camera blinked to life, signifying on air. Yet, despite the surge of adrenaline threatening to choke my voice, I found a well of unexpected resolve. I forced my voice to remain a level, unwavering monotone, a stark contrast to the internal tempest. I recounted every chilling detail, painting a vivid picture of the terror, the terrifying cadence of gunshots echoing down the hallway, each one a hammer blow against the fragile peace of our school. And her, Miss Brown, standing there, her gaze sweeping over us, a cold, calculated assessment. She made a deliberate choice not to protect, but to assert her warped sense of authority, prioritizing her control over our very survival, essentially sentencing us to a horrifying gamble with fate. How could a teacher stand there, motionless, while children's lives hung in the balance? That evening, as the local news segment finally aired, a wave of digital reactions crashed over me. My phone, a constant companion, transformed into an incessant, vibrating testament to the story's impact, buzzing relentlessly for what felt like an eternity. Each notification was a fresh surge of support, sympathy, or shared outrage, a digital chorus reacting to the raw truth I had just laid bare. The very next day, a surprising ripple of defiance spread through our small, shell-shocked community. Ben, usually so reserved, bravely stepped into the digital arena, posting his own harrowing account on Instagram. This wasn't a decision made lightly. His parents, pillars of the community, had, I later learned, pleaded with him, their voices laced with fear for his future, urging him to remain silent, to protect their family's reputation. But Ben, channeling an unexpected courage, refused to be silenced. His post was a gut-wrenching confession, a stark admission of the paralyzing fear that had gripped him in that moment of crisis. He detailed how, for a terrifying eternity, he had almost remained frozen in his seat, not because of the active shooter, but because the specter of Miss Brown's whip. Humiliating punishment loomed larger in his young mind than the very real threat of death. It was a chilling indictment of the classroom environment she had cultivated. And then, in words that resonated deeply, he wrote, I saved his life, referring to the classmate he'd instinctively pulled to safety by defying her. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of a profound truth, an act of rebellion born from a desperate instinct to survive. The internet, a beast of both cruelty and compassion, devoured his story. Within a mere 3 hours, his raw, unvarnished testimony had garnered an astonishing 10,000 shares, a viral wildfire spreading through feeds and timelines, its reach climbing exponentially, amplifying our collective voices. That same afternoon, as the digital world buzzed with Ben's bravery, a more official tremor shook our household. An FBI agent, his voice crisp and professional, contacted my parents, revealing a startling new piece of the puzzle their relentless investigation had painstakingly uncovered. It appeared that the night before the horrific events unfolded, Jake, the shooter, had sent a series of frantic texts to a close friend. These messages painted a grim picture, detailing how Miss Brown had, in his own words, destroyed him in front of the entire class, humiliating him in a public spectacle that evidently festered into a potent cocktail of rage and resentment. The friend, burdened by an understandable, albeit misguided, sense of guilt, or perhaps even fear, had attempted to erase these damning digital breadcrumbs, deleting the messages from his own device. However, the relentless digital forensics team, delving deep into the labyrinthine depths of the phone company's servers, had miraculously recovered them, pulling these crucial pieces of evidence from the digital ether. These recovered texts were horrifyingly explicit, leaving no room for ambiguity. They meticulously detailed Jake's chilling plans, outlining his intentions with a terrifying clarity, and, most disturbingly, they laid bare his intense, almost pathological hatred specifically directed at Miss Brown, solidifying the motive in stark, undeniable terms. Just 2 days later, the already turbulent waters of our town were further roiled by another bombshell revelation. News outlets, almost gleefully, reported that Miss Brown's husband, unable to bear the weight of her actions or the public scrutiny, had filed for divorce and, in a dramatic, almost theatrical gesture, had silently absconded in the dead of night, severing all ties. Later, publicly accessible court documents unveiled a telling truth. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. He had evidently been meticulously planning his exit for months, a silent, subterranean unraveling of their marriage. But the shooting, a cataclysmic event, had served as an undeniable accelerant, pushing his carefully constructed timeline forward, forcing his hand and exposing the fractures in their life for all to see. The phrase resonated with a chilling finality. Even her own husband, the person who ostensibly knew her best, was abandoning ship, leaving her to face the storm alone. It painted a devastating picture of her isolation and the perceived indefensibility of her actions. Despite the lingering trauma, the mundane necessities of life persisted. With the semester drawing to a close, I was compelled to return to the hallowed, now haunted, halls of the school to retrieve my belongings. An unwelcome pilgrimage back to the scene of an imaginable terror. Room 203, the epicenter of the tragedy, remained a silent, stark monument to what had transpired, its door still ominously sealed with vivid yellow crime scene tape. A stark visual barrier screaming of past violence, a stark reminder that this was no longer just a classroom. The hallway itself felt profoundly wrong, imbued with an oppressive, almost palpable sense of unease. The air hung heavy with a pungent, sterile scent of industrial-strength cleaner, a valiant but ultimately futile attempt to scrub away not just physical traces, but the lingering stench of fear and blood that, to my heightened senses, seemed to cling stubbornly to the very walls. It was an olfactory assault, a desperate effort to mask something far more sinister and indelible. Every second I spent inside felt like an eternity. I moved with a frantic urgency, yanking my few remaining possessions from my locker, my movements jerky and rushed, as if the building itself might collapse around me. Outside, Tyler, a steadfast guardian, waited, his car idling in the parking lot, the engine a low hum of readiness, a silent signal for a swift escape from this place of dark memories. As the legal gears slowly began to grind, the prosecution enlisted the formidable expertise of Dr. Catherine Mills, a renowned specialist in crisis response and emergency protocols, a woman whose professional demeanor promised an objective, unflinching analysis of the chaotic events. Dr. Mills dedicated 3 intensive days to meticulously poring over every shred of evidence, every witness statement, every minute detail, dissecting the situation with the precision of a surgeon. Her ultimate conclusion, delivered with dispassionate clinical detachment, was nothing short of brutal, a hammer blow of condemnation against Miss Brown. She stated unequivocally that Miss Brown had not only violated every single established safety protocol, the very guidelines designed to protect students in such dire circumstances, but had also displayed gross negligence and egregious disregard for her duty of care. This negligence, Dr. Mills emphasized, had directly and demonstrably endangered our lives, turning a potentially survivable situation into a terrifying death trap. Meanwhile, a perplexing, almost infuriating counter-narrative was unfolding. Miss Brown's staunch supporters, a seemingly well-funded and fiercely loyal faction, managed to raise an astonishing $50,000 in legal defense funds within a mere 2 hours. This rapid influx of cash left me, and many others, wondering with a cynical bitterness, who exactly possessed such deep pockets and such intense, unwavering motivation to ardently defend a teacher who, by all accounts, had inexplicably, unforgivably kept children seated, exposed, and vulnerable, while the chilling sound of gunshots reverberated through the very fabric of our school. What dark alchemy could twist logic to justify such an act? Dr. Mills's comprehensive report, a formidable 50-page document dense with precise professional language and meticulously cited facts, ultimately distilled down to a stark, unassailable truth. It essentially concluded, without sensationalism or hyperbole, that Miss Brown had made a conscious, deliberate choice to prioritize her own rigid, misguided sense of control over the desperate. Emboldened by their financial success, Miss Brown's supporters, seemingly tone deaf to the raw wounds in our community, decided to escalate their public defense, organizing a support rally on the steps of the courthouse. What they envisioned as a demonstration of solidarity, however, quickly devolved into a public relations disaster of monumental proportions. The very air became thick with tension when, amidst the sea of Brown supporters, the heartbroken parents of the 2 students who had tragically lost their lives appeared. They stood not as passive observers, but as dignified, grief-stricken counter-protesters, their silent presence a powerful, gut-wrenching indictment of the rally's very existence. The volatile atmosphere ignited when a particularly fervent supporter, oblivious to the immense suffering around him, inexplicably shrieked, "Brown did nothing wrong," the words, a cruel, misguided shard of glass, pierced the fragile composure of one of the mothers, whose child had been lost. In a moment that seared itself into the collective memory, she simply crumpled, her life giving out beneath her, collapsing in a heap of unimaginable grief, her heart-wrenching sobs echoing off the cold stone of the courthouse steps, a sound more potent than any shouted slogan. A photograph capturing that raw, agonizing moment, the mother's anguished despair starkly contrasted against the backdrop of fervent, misguided support rocketed across the internet, going viral within minutes. It became an instant, indelible symbol, a brutal visual testament to a town torn irrevocably in two, its very soul cleaved by grief and conflicting loyalties. The viral image, a beacon for sensationalism, acted as a powerful magnet. Within hours, news vans, emblazoned with logos from television stations 3 states away, began to descend upon our quiet community, transforming it into a temporary media circus. A harsh spotlight illuminating our raw, communal wounds for the entire nation to gawk at. That weekend, in a quiet act of profound compassion, Tyler's mom, recognizing the deep, unspoken need for shared healing, organized a support group meeting at the community center. 23 of us, the survivors of room 203, drawn together by a shared, unspeakable trauma, gathered awkwardly in a circle of creaking folding chairs, our faces etched with a common pain, our eyes searching for understanding in one another. As we tentatively began to share our stories, a girl from Mr. Peterson's class, her nervousness manifest in the way she relentlessly twisted a strand of her hair around her finger, recounted how their teacher, without a moment's hesitation, had immediately flipped desks, transforming them into an improvised, yet effective, barrier against the unknown threat. Another kid, from the science wing, spoke of their teacher's lightning-fast thinking, describing how he had instinctively herded them into the chemical storage room, a surprisingly secure refuge. And then, with surprising strength, jammed the door shut, barricading it with a heavy filing cabinet, buying them precious moments of safety. The crushing weight of these contrasting narratives settled heavily in the room. Every single survivor, it seemed, had a similar tale of swift, decisive action, of a teacher who had instinctively become a shield. Everyone, that is, except us. Their teachers had acted as guardians, protectors in the face of chaos. Ours, Miss Brown, had, through her inaction, effectively tried to get us killed, a bitter, unforgivable truth. The raw, unfiltered pain of this realization hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Then one girl, her eyes locking onto mine with a profound, shared understanding, articulated the unspoken truth that resonated deeply within us all. Her voice quiet, yet firm, she simply stated, we shouldn't have had to save ourselves. And as her words hung there, heavy with the weight of injustice, every single head in that circle of trauma nodded in silent, aching agreement. It took an agonizingly long 35 days, a testament to the grinding slowness of bureaucracy, but finally, under the relentless, searing spotlight of national media pressure, which had become simply too intense to ignore, the State Board of Education reluctantly launched its own formal investigation into the catastrophic events. That very afternoon, Rebecca, my lawyer, called me, her voice tinged with a cautious optimism. She informed me that the investigators, now fully mobilized, were issuing subpoenas for a staggering 10 years' worth of records from the entire school district. A broad net cast to uncover any and all systemic failures and hidden truths. And then came the bombshell. The investigators, in their meticulous review, had unearthed a shocking total of 17 formal complaints lodged against Miss Brown over the years. Each one a red flag ignored, each grievance mysteriously lost or never properly documented within the district's labyrinthine record-keeping system. It reeked of a deliberate cover-up. This discovery fundamentally shifted the landscape of accountability. Rebecca confirmed that criminal charges against the very administrators who had, wittingly or unwittingly, enabled Miss Brown's pattern of behavior by covering for her negligence were now firmly on the table, a stark promise of justice reaching beyond the immediate perpetrator. That evening, my mom, ever the optimist hoping for a semblance of normalcy, arranged a dinner with Tyler's family. We gathered around their large, polished dining room table, a picture of familial warmth that felt utterly false. The reality was a somber, strained affair, each of us merely pushing food around our plates. Our appetites vanished, the unspoken trauma a heavy shroud over the meal. Tyler's dad, in a valiant but futile attempt to conjure a future, kept trying to steer the conversation towards Tyler's college plans for the upcoming year. But his words, hopeful and well-intentioned, simply hung in the air, heavy and unheard, dissolving into the silence. His mom, equally determined to weave a thread of normalcy, began to excitedly list potential summer vacation ideas, but her voice abruptly died mid-sentence. A sudden, sharp bang from a car backfiring outside shattered the fragile peace, and in a collective, involuntary spasm, we all jumped, our bodies tensing, hearts leaping into our throats, a visceral, unmistakable reminder that the fear still clawed at us. We were, all of us, locked in a silent, desperate charade, pretending that the old us still existed, that we hadn't been irrevocably altered. We feigned nonchalance, desperately trying to convince ourselves, and each other, that loud, unexpected noises no longer made us freeze in primal terror. That the sudden shifting of shadows no longer sent our hearts rocketing into a frantic, fearful rhythm. But the truth was a stark, undeniable reality. We were different now, forever marked. On day 40, a date now indelibly etched into my memory, I found myself standing on an elevated platform within the hallowed, imposing halls of the state capitol building. Before me, a cold, metallic microphone, an instrument of amplification, stood poised, and beyond it, a hushed audience of 300 individuals, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Looked unexpectedly. Behind a long, polished mahogany desk, the legislative committee, their expressions largely inscrutable, sat taking diligent notes, their pens scratching softly on pads. As I began to read from my carefully prepared statement, each word chosen with deliberate precision, each sentence carrying the weight of our shared experience, my voice, though still tinged with the tremor of memory, gained strength with each word. I told them, unequivocally, how Miss Brown had perversely weaponized her authority at the precise moment a real weapon, a tool of destruction, was loosed in our school. I laid bare the core of her culpability. She had chosen her own inflated ego, her need for absolute control over the precious, fragile lives of her students. And then, my voice rising slightly, I posed a rhetorical question, one that echoed the frustration of so many, a question directed at the very heart of systemic failure. How many complaints? How many ignored red flags? How many cries for help? Does it truly take before someone in a position of power finally acts, before accountability is demanded? When I finished the last words of my statement hanging in the charge there, the representatives on the committee offered no immediate reaction. They simply stared at me, their faces unreadable, perhaps processing the gravity of my words, perhaps simply overwhelmed by the raw emotion I had poured into my testimony. 2 days later, a new, unforeseen piece of the puzzle dramatically altered the entire trajectory of the investigation. A school custodian named Frank, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, contacted our lawyer, his voice trembling with the weight of the secret he carried. He claimed to have something huge, a piece of evidence so significant it could redefine everything. What Frank possessed was astonishing. Security footage dating back 3 years. Footage that no one involved in the official investigation even knew existed. It was a digital ghost, captured by an antiquated camera system that had simply been forgotten, left running and recording long after it should have been decommissioned. An oversight that now proved pivotal. The video, raw and unflinching, captured a haunting scene. A young Jake, visibly distraught, emerging from Miss Brown's classroom, tears streaming uncontrollably down his face. His expression a mask of humiliation and raw pain. In a desperate, self-destructive act of rage and frustration, he then turned and repeatedly punched a nearby wall with such force that his knuckles, in a visceral display of his anguish, began to bleed, leaving crimson streaks on the sterile paint. The precise timestamp on the footage aligned perfectly, to the minute, with the exact day Jake had officially filed his complaint against Miss Brown, a complaint that, like so many others, had mysteriously vanished into the bureaucratic abyss. This footage was undeniable, irrefutable proof of the long-standing, deeply rooted animosity and the profound emotional impact Miss Brown had had on him. The shocking truth was that the original investigation, despite its official stature, had never included this crucial, devastating footage. Why? Because in their haste or their oversight, no one had thought to check the old, supposedly defunct camera system. A critical error that had allowed a significant piece of the puzzle to remain hidden in plain sight. On day 42, another significant development occurred. Ben's family, who had initially withdrawn from the lawsuit under pressure, contacted us. Their tone was resolute, their message clear. They were officially rejoining the legal fight, standing once again with us, their previous reservations evidently overcome. The timing of their return was, to say the least, remarkably convenient, almost suspiciously so. It was no mere coincidence that his dad's company, which had suffered a sudden and inexplicable loss of lucrative contracts, mysteriously had every single one of them reinstated on the very same day the FBI launched a formal investigation into Miss Brown's influential brother-in-law for alleged witness tampering, an obvious tactic to silence opposition. Ben's dad, in a carefully worded public statement, declared that some things are more important than money, attempting to frame their decision as a moral awakening. However, among those of us who understood the intricate, often dirty, dance of power and influence, we all knew the unvarnished truth. The brother-in-law's sudden withdrawal of pressure, a swift capitulation, occurred only when federal agents, their presence a formidable display of governmental authority, showed up unannounced at his office, making it clear that his machinations had not gone unnoticed and would not be tolerated. The following week, the grand jury, after reviewing the mounting, incontrovertible evidence, convened and delivered a powerful indictment, upgrading Miss Brown's charges from mere negligence to the far more severe and morally reprehensible charge of attempted murder through depraved indifference. This legal term, chilling in its precision, described an act of such extreme recklessness and callous disregard for human life that it effectively equates to an intent to kill. Predictably, her lawyer immediately took to the news circuit, decrying the upgraded charges as an outrageous example of prosecutorial overreach, a desperate attempt to frame the legal action as an unjust vendetta. However, the district attorney, in a powerful and unyielding press conference, countered this narrative with unassailable logic, patiently explaining that the act of deliberately keeping children exposed and vulnerable during an active shooter situation, rather than attempting any measure of protection, constituted an extreme disregard for human life, a cold, calculated indifference to their survival. The legal experts on every major news network analyzing the nuances of the new charge largely concurred, nodding in grim agreement as they dissected the DA's arguments, confirming that the legal framework for depraved indifference was indeed a fitting, albeit devastating, description of Miss Brown's chilling inaction. The news anchors, their expressions etched with a profound gravity, reported that this particular charge, usually reserved for the most devastating drunk driving fatalities, was now being applied to Miss Brown. Could this truly set a new, unsettling precedent, reshaping the very definition of culpability in such a tragic event? On day 45, the thick envelope bearing the State University emblem had arrived, a tangible symbol of Tyler's dreams, his early admission letter. A surge of relief and pride had momentarily washed over him, a fleeting glimpse of a normal future. Yet, by that very afternoon, the weight of our new reality had compelled him to make a heartbreaking call, asking to defer for a gap year. The choice, though painful, felt inevitable, a silent acknowledgement of the crisis that had engulfed our lives. He came over that night, his presence a quiet comfort in the deepening twilight. We sat on my porch, the familiar creak of the swing echoing the unspoken turmoil within us, as he meticulously explained, his voice low and resolute, that he simply wouldn't, leave me to navigate the harrowing waters of the upcoming trial alone. How could he? We both knew, with a chilling certainty, that what we shared was no longer the fleeting and complicated affection of normal teenage relationships. We were now inextricably bound by something far darker, a connection that stretched beyond mere love, twisting into the primal, desperate grip of shared survival. Day 47 dawned, surprisingly, as my first truly good day since the shooting. For 6 precious, uninterrupted hours, as I helped Mom methodically reorganize the chaotic expanse of the garage, my mind found a fragile, temporary peace. I went through the motions of sorting old boxes and dusty tools, the mundane task of merciful bomb, and the constant, knowing images mercifully receded. But then, as abruptly and brutally as a head-on collision, the guilt slammed into me. A cruel punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. How could I possibly forget, even for a single minute, the two kids who were gone forever? Was solace a luxury I no longer deserved? During our session, Dr. Patel, in her calm, reassuring voice, reminded me that healing is rarely a smooth, linear progression, more like a jagged mountain path. Yet, despite her wisdom, that fleeting moment of peace felt like a profound betrayal. It felt, to my raw, wounded heart, as though I was abandoning Michael and Sophia, abandoning the kids who hadn't made it out, leaving them behind in their final, tragic moments. The state board convened their hearing on day 50. A formal tribunal assembled to determine the fate of Miss Brown's teaching license. She swept in, impeccably tailored in a severe black suit, her demeanor a chilling blend of defiance and self-pity, audaciously claiming this entire proceeding was nothing short of a lynching of a dedicated educator. But when the board presented her with the damning testimonials from 37 former students, each recounting a specific instance of her destructive behavior, her mask slipped further. With a dismissive sneer, she brushed them aside, branding them weak children who simply couldn't handle high standards. The visible discomfort rippled through the room. Several board members instinctively pulled back from their microphones. The woman presiding over the hearing had to call for order not once, but twice, as Ms. Brown's voice escalated into a shrill, furious tirade about cancel culture, her venomous rhetoric doing more to condemn her than any testimony could. Without a single dissenting vote, they moved, with a resounding and unequivocal condemnation, to permanently revoke her license and, more significantly, referred the case to the Attorney General for additional, far more serious charges related to child endangerment, crimes that apparently spanned her entire professional career. The subsequent weeks blurred into an exhausting continuum of legal briefings and therapy sessions, each day a struggle against the tide of grief and uncertainty. Then, on day 52, Detective Santos's call shattered the fragile monotony. Her voice, usually so steady, carried a tremor as she delivered news that made my hands tremble uncontrollably, sending my phone clattering to the floor. She'd been on a relentless pursuit, meticulously digging through old personnel files buried deep within the district office archives. There, she'd unearthed a sealed folder from 2009, a forgotten artifact detailing Miss Brown's transfer from Westfield High. The contents were sickening. A student from that school had attempted to take her own life, leaving behind a harrowing 3-page note. The note, a devastating and meticulously detailed indictment, specifically named Ms. Brown, holding her accountable for the relentless daily humiliation and insidious mind games that had inexorably pushed her to such a desperate precipice. In a scandalous maneuver, a cynical disregard for justice, the school had quietly facilitated Miss Brown's transfer to our district, sidestepping any investigation. All because the superintendent's wife, it turned out, was Miss Brown's cousin. Within hours of Detective Santos, in a calculated move, leaking this explosive information to a reporter friend, my phone began to erupt with notifications. It was a digital uprising. A Facebook group had spontaneously formed, chillingly named survivors of Patricia Brown, and it already boasted over 200 members. A torrent of suppressed truth was unleashed, as former students from 3 different schools, some dating back an astonishing 25 years, began sharing stories of her cruel tactics. They spoke of the public shaming, where children were frozen in fear before their peers. The insidious way she'd issue deliberately contradictory instructions, only to then savagely punish kids for their resultant confusion, and the bewildering gaslighting. Where she'd deny things she'd explicitly said just minutes earlier, planting seeds of doubt and self-blame. One girl from 1998 vividly recalled Miss Brown telling her, in front of the entire class, that she was too stupid for college, then brazenly denying it when her distraught parents complained. Another kid from 2003 recounted how Ms. Brown had forced him to stand before the class while she meticulously listed everything wrong with his essay, even grotesquely mocking his stutter. The insidious pattern was always the same, a grotesque cycle of abuse, always protected by administrators who found it far easier and more convenient to quietly transfer her to another unsuspecting district than to confront the mounting complaints and systemic issues. It was a chilling testament to institutional apathy and a profound failure of their duty of care. 2 days later, my mom drove me, in a silence heavy with unspoken grief, to meet the Johnson and Garca families. Their children, Michael and Sophia, had died in the shooting. A profound tragedy made even more agonizing by the bitter irony that they had stayed at their desks, faithfully following Ms. Brown's orders. Mrs. Johnson, her eyes welling with inched tears, reached out and gently held my hand, a gesture of incredible grace amidst her own unimaginable grief, assuring me, her voice thick with sorrow, that she didn't blame any of us survivors, Mr. Garca's voice, raw with emotion, cracked painfully as he looked at me and confessed. We fought to save ourselves while their children never got the chance because they followed the rules. It was a harrowing indictment of blind adherence, a devastating truth. We sat in their living room, weeping together for over an hour, our shared sorrow a palpable presence, as we quietly looked at photos of Michael and Sophia, vibrant and full of life, posing joyously at their prom just 3 short weeks before their lives were so cruelly cut short. Rebecca called that very afternoon with updates on the prosecution strategy, and what she told me sent a wave of nausea crashing over me, making me bolt to the bathroom to throw up. The prosecutors, she explained, had unearthed irrefutable evidence. Ms. Brown had known, with chilling certainty, that Jake was likely targeting her specifically, based on previous unsettling incidents where he'd confronted her after class. Yet, with a level of calculated malice that defied comprehension, she had deliberately kept us exposed, using our vulnerability as a form of psychological torture. The prosecution intended to argue that she had deployed us as human shields for her monstrous ego, that she would rather risk our lives, rather than face the humiliation of admitting she was wrong about the lockdown protocol. The horrifying truth, far more depraved than any of us had dared to imagine, was that she saw us not as students, but as mere props in her twisted power game, even as a shooter stalked the very halls of our school. A cold, tactical assessment of human collateral. By day 56, the school district's lawyers were in full, frantic panic mode, desperately trying to contain the escalating public relations disaster. They offered a colossal $30 million settlement, to be divided among all the affected families. While carefully admitting no direct wrongdoing, their carefully worded statement acknowledged failures and oversight. Some families, facing the grim reality of years of draining legal battles, immediately accepted the settlement, seeking some form of immediate financial relief. But my parents, along with 12 other families, held out, their resolve unyielding, demanding not just money, but true criminal justice and profound accountability. 2 days later, Tyler picked me up, and we drove in somber silence to visit the sprawling memorial that had taken root outside the school. Hundreds upon hundreds of vibrant flowers, soft teddy bears, and poignant photographs now covered the entire front steps, a poignant, sprawling tapestry of collective grief. Amidst the tributes, someone had left a copy of the student handbook, the lockdown procedures highlighted in an accusing yellow, with a simple, yet screaming note attached. These rules save lives when teachers follow them. We stood there, hands clasped tightly, quietly reading all the heartfelt messages people had left. When Tyler suddenly spotted something that made him squeeze my fingers so hard it hurt. Tucked between two bouquets, almost hidden, was a printed copy of Jake's manifesto, the disturbing document that the defense teams had only just gained access to. 5 chilling pages, meticulously detailing Ms. Brown's teaching methods with the precision of a psychological torture manual. He had documented the public humiliation, the deliberately confusing instructions followed by cruel punishment for not listening, the insidious gaslighting about things she'd said or done. Example after painstaking example, complete with specific dates and corroborating witnesses. It was a meticulously crafted indictment, cold and damning, and the FBI, through extensive interviews with former students, had verified every single incident he described, an unimpeachable testament to the prolonged torment he had endured. That very same week, a dam finally broke. Ms. Brown's former teaching assistant from 2015, who had inexplicably remained silent for years, finally spoke out in a raw, emotional interview with the local news. She revealed she had quit after just 1 semester, utterly unable to continue watching the horrifying abuse that Ms. Brown routinely inflicted. It seemed Ms. Brown's cruelties to students would finally cease, as it had even been formally reported to Principal Foster. Yet, infuriatingly, nothing was done. A bureaucratic shield of tenure protected her, and the union would undoubtedly wage war against any disciplinary action. It was another grim reminder of an administrator who shamelessly chose the path of least resistance, prioritizing personal ease over the sacred duty of safeguarding children. Another adult who, years ago, held the power to prevent all this but simply didn't. Then, in an almost cinematic twist of fate, Frank, the custodian, unearthed forgotten security footage from an antiquated camera system. It was the peak plot device saves the day moment, a deus ex machina appearing precisely when all hope seemed to dwindle. Though, I suppose, real life occasionally does present evidence gift wrapped with a bow, just when you need it most desperately. Ben's deposition unfolded on day 62, a stark turning point. His parents later shared the transcript with me, their pride palpable in every word, their hearts swelling with admiration for his astonishing strength. His voice, they recounted, never once wavered, a testament to his resolve. As he declared with unwavering conviction, Miss Brown taught us that authority was more important than safety. But that day, I taught everyone that survival is the only thing that truly matters. The prosecutor, probing, asked if he blamed me for daring to defy Miss Brown. And then, without a moment's hesitation, delivered a stinging indictment. I was the only adult in that room who actually acted like one. He articulated the bitter irony, pointing out that a mere 17-year-old girl displayed more profound leadership than a woman who had accumulated 25 years of teaching experience. The very next morning, the FBI, like a storm gathering, descended upon Miss Brown's brother-in-law's house, brandishing a warrant for witness tampering and obstruction of justice. They had caught him on a wiretap, his voice chillingly calm as he threatened Ben's dad's business partners, all to coerce Ben into changing his testimony. Suddenly, her carefully constructed support network, that fragile edifice of loyalty and intimidation, began to crumble around her, brick by insidious brick. People started to grasp the appalling lengths she had gone to protect herself, hiring clandestine private investigators to unearth damaging dirt on students' families. Unleashing her brother-in-law to apply relentless pressure on anyone who might dare testify against her, the rot was exposed. 2 weeks later, the quiet hum of our kitchen table became a makeshift war room. Rebecca, the prosecutor, sat opposite me, meticulously spreading out pages of notes for my victim impact statement. She slid a legal pad across the polished surface, her gaze firm, telling me, "Don't hold back. The jury needs to understand everything, Ms." Round did that day Tyler, a quiet anchor of support, sat beside me, his hand a comforting weight on my knee beneath the table. I began to write, the pen scratching furiously across the paper, detailing the excruciating moments he kept us tethered to our desks while a shooter roamed the halls, each step a death knell. I wrote until my hand cramped, the words spilling out, a torrent of memory and emotion. Then, I shifted to my laptop, fingers flying across the keys, only to return to the visceral act of writing when the screen became too impersonal. The words emerged, at first, raw with anger, then softening into a profound sadness, and finally settling into an exhausting weariness. Rebecca read through my sprawling draft, her head nodding slowly, assuring me this will help the jury see the truth, the unvarnished reality. A mere 2 days later, the court clerk's call brought news that both ignited hope and deepened despair. The trial was set for 3 months out. 3 whole, agonizing months of waiting, suspended in a cruel limbo. I desperately tried to re-engage with the normalcy of life. Stat prep, college application shows mundane yet monumental rites of passage. But how, I wondered, could I even begin to articulate future goals when I had so narrowly escaped having no future at all? The Common App essay prompt, benignly asking about a challenge I'd overcome, mocked me. I would simply stare at the blank page for hours, my mind a storm of what-ifs, and how could I ever forget? Then, on day 70, my phone exploded with text from Ben, a flurry of digital alerts announcing the latest, most audacious affront. Ms. Brown, in a stunning display of delusion, had sent an email to his parents, asserting that their son was confused about what had transpired and audaciously suggesting they get him therapy to help him remember correctly. The prosecutor, swift and decisive, had her arrested within 2 short hours. News vans, a clamoring armada, materialized outside her house, their cameras flashing, capturing the surreal image of Ms. Brown being led out in handcuffs, screaming hysterically about being persecuted for maintaining order. The irony was as sharp as a blade. The judge, recognizing the gravity of her defiance, called an emergency hearing the very next morning. I sat in the gallery, a silent observer, as the prosecutor coolly presented the email, explaining with damning clarity how Ms. Brown had flagrantly violated her bail conditions by directly contacting witnesses. The judge, his face grim, didn't even permit her lawyer to finish his floundering argument before unequivocally revoking her bail. Court officers moved with practiced efficiency towards her, and she sprang up fast, her hand catching her water glass, sending it crashing to the floor. A sound that echoed the shattering of her carefully constructed facade. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw true, unadulterated fear blaze in her eyes as they clamped the handcuffs on her wrists. She looked directly at me, her gaze piercing, as they led her past the gallery, and in that fleeting, terrifying moment, I could see the dawning. Horrific realization hit her. She wasn't in control anymore. The power had irrevocably shifted. 2 nights later, in the pre-dawn stillness of 3 a.m., Mom discovered me at the kitchen table, a silent sentinel surrounded by a battlefield of college essay drafts. My Common App essay, finally taking shape, was about that pivotal day I consciously chose to survive, despite my teacher's explicit, dangerous orders. Mom read over my shoulder, her voice soft with concern, suggesting I didn't have to write about it if the burden was too heavy. But I shook my head, my conviction resolute. I have to, I told her, because this is who I am now. We both knew, with a certainty that was both liberating and heartbreaking, that I would never again be the person I was before that day. That girl was gone, transformed. The trial finally commenced 3 months later, on a cold, unforgiving Monday morning. The prosecutor's opening statement, delivered with gravitas, included a moment that sent a shiver through the courtroom, playing the raw audio from my phone. The recording I'd started for a class project, now a damning testament. You could distinctly hear the shots drawing closer, the terrified whimpers of students, and then Ms. Brown's voice, chillingly clear as day, declaring that we were merely being hysterical and manufacturing fear. Several jurors instinctively brought their hands to their mouths. A silent gasp of horror rippling through the room. Miss Brown, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, sat at the defense table, an actress still perfecting her role as the aggrieved victim. The next day, it was my turn. I testified for 4 straight, grueling hours. The prosecutor, with painstaking care, walked me through every agonizing second of those 47 minutes, guiding me to describe precisely where everyone was sitting. The exact words Ms. Brown uttered, the deliberate way she had blocked the light switch, plunging us into a false sense of security. Her lawyer, slick and dismissive, attempted to paint me as some rebellious, authority-hating kid. But I remained calm, a steady rock in the storm of his questioning, simply repeating the unvarnished facts. When he, with a sneer, asked why I had defied a teacher's direct order, I looked directly at the jury, my voice clear and unwavering, and said, I chose to live while she chose her ego. The courtroom fell into a profound, heavy silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity, perhaps 10 long seconds, before anyone dared to speak. On day 3, Tyler, his youthful face etched with the memory of terror, took the stand. He spoke of receiving my frantic texts, of the gut-wrenching knowledge that I was hiding in that cramped supply closet, acutely aware of the mortal danger I faced. His voice, usually so steady, audibly cracked, a fissure in his composure, as he recounted the horrifying moment he believed I was dead because I had stopped responding. Ms. Brown's lawyer, ever the opportunist, objected, coldly labeling it emotional manipulation. But the judge, his patience clearly wearing thin, firmly retorted that the jury needed to fully comprehend the profound trauma Ms. Brown had inflicted by deliberately keeping students exposed to such peril. Tyler, visibly struggling to maintain his composure, had to take 3 distinct breaks, each a small eternity, to collect himself. Day 4 changed everything, a seismic shift in the trial's landscape. The prosecution, leveraging cutting-edge FBI technology, presented enhanced security footage audio. Suddenly, sounds and whispers that had previously been swallowed by the ambient noise now emerged with chilling clarity, unlocking hidden truths we couldn't make out before. At the precise timestamp of 9:47 a.m., right after the first piercing cracks of the initial shots ripped through the air, Misty Brown's voice, startlingly calm and chillingly distinct, cut through the ensuing chaos. "If this is real," she declared, her words echoing with an unsettling detachment, "they deserve what they get for not respecting me." The audacity, the sheer indifference in her tone, was so profound that a juror actually gasped out loud, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath that resonated through the hushed courtroom. Even her own lawyer, his face a mask of profound shock, looked utterly stunned because this damning statement, this crucial piece of the puzzle, had been conspicuously absent from every single discovery material. How could such a pivotal piece of evidence, a direct admission of her mindset, have been withheld or overlooked? The tension in the gallery became unbearable, a palpable hum of outrage, and the judge, faced with outbursts of raw anguish and a cacophony of enraged parents yelling, had no choice but to call an immediate recess. On day 5, against every piece of sound legal advice from her counsel, Miss Brown defiantly decided to testify. She sat in the witness box, a rigid, almost imperious figure, her posture radiating an unwavering self-conviction. She insisted, with an almost delusional fervor, that she had maintained perfect order throughout the terrifying ordeal. That way, the students were never in any real danger. In her warped perception, she was not the perpetrator, but rather a victim, being unjustly persecuted for simply upholding her standards. She articulated, with a chilling lack of empathy, that she was merely protecting us from the very real panic that would have ensued, arguing that any attempt to run around would have inevitably led to far more perilous outcomes. The prosecutor, a seasoned strategist, allowed her to continue her monologue, patiently letting her narrative unfold for a full 20 minutes, every word further exposing her profound disconnect from reality. Then, with a subtle shift in his stance, he posed a single, devastating question that caused the entire courtroom to fall into an immediate, profound silence. The air growing impossibly heavy. "Did you recognize Jake Wilson's voice when he was in the hallway outside your classroom?" Ms. Brown froze completely, caught in a spotlight of inescapable truth. Her mouth opened and closed in a grotesque, silent pantomime, like a fish gasping for air on dry land. The agonizing 15 seconds that followed felt like an eternity, stretching out in the suffocating silence. Finally, barely audible, a raw, whispered yes escaped her lips. At that single syllable, the fragile peace of the courtroom shattered into 1,000 pieces. A torrent of raw emotion erupted, people shouting, crying, a collective release of pent-up grief and fury. The judge, his face grim, had to bang his gavel over and over, the resounding thuds a desperate attempt to rein in the chaos, to restore some semblance of order to the pandemonium. After things eventually quieted down again, the air still thick with residual tension, the prosecutor stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked directly up to Ms. Brown's face, her proximity chilling. She asked the question that everyone in that room had been thinking, the terrifying implication hanging in the air like a guillotine blade, but which no one dared to voice aloud. Did Ms. Brown know it was Jake Wilson in that hallway? The same Jake Wilson who filed 3 documented complaints against her last year, detailing her abusive and negligent behavior. The revelation, implicitly connecting her inaction to a personal vendetta, was like a venomous dart. Miss Brown's hand started shaking uncontrollably, a tremor rippling through her fingers. Her face, in an almost unnatural draining of color, went from a blotchy red to a deathly white, and then to an ashen gray in what felt like less than 5 seconds. The whole courtroom collectively held its breath, a single, agonizing pause, waiting for her answer, for her final, damning confession. Finally, her carefully constructed facade splintered, giving way to a raw and bridled fury. She cracked, screaming hysterically about how Jake, just like all of us, needed to learn respect. The jury members exchanged stunned glances, their mouths agape, a tableau of disbelief. In the back row, a solitary lady began to weep, her quiet sobs a stark counterpoint to the earlier chaos. 3 weeks later, we all gathered again for verdict day, and you could feel the tension in the air, a palpable hum, a static charge that prickled the skin, like electricity before a storm. The jury deliberated for a grueling 6 hours, an eternity of waiting, but when they finally returned, their decision was a complete and utter condemnation. They found her guilty on everything. 23 counts of putting kids in danger, a chilling testament to her negligence, plus something called depraved indifference, a legal term that sounded even more horrifying, implying an extreme, callous disregard for human life. Ms. Brown, upon hearing the verdict, collapsed in her chair, a sudden, almost theatrical fall, as if the immense weight of the judgment had literally crushed her. For the first time, her face wasn't contorted by anger or defiance, but by a stark primal fear, a raw terror that finally exposed a vulnerable woman beneath the rigid facade. The judge delivered the sentence, stating she could face up to 25 years in prison. At that pronouncement, the families of the 3 children who had tragically died during the incident, their lives irrevocably shattered, started sobbing anew. A fresh wave of wrenching grief echoing through the solemn courtroom. 2 weeks after that, it was my turn. I had to read my victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing. My hands were slick with a nervous sheen, sweating so badly that the paper threatened to slip from my trembling grasp. But I forced myself to meet her gaze as I spoke. I told her, my voice surprisingly steady, that she had inadvertently taught me a profound and terrible lesson, that being in charge, wielding authority without true wisdom or foresight, was not leadership, but a dangerous, reckless gamble. That trying to control people without genuinely caring about their well-being was simply being cruel, nothing more than thinly veiled meanness. I declared that I would carry those harrowing 47 minutes, that terrifying span of time, with me forever, a permanent scar on my soul. But I added, she would have to carry the burden of what she chose to do, a far heavier cross. The judge sentenced her to 18 years, with a chance for parole after 12. When the guards finally put the handcuffs on her, her freedom irrevocably taken, she turned to all of us one last time. With a strange, almost serene detachment, she said she was just keeping standards. Even then, after everything, she didn't get it. She remained utterly blind to the magnitude of her action, the devastation she had wrought. And that, perhaps, was the worst part of all. A month later, Tyler and I sat in his car parked outside the school, watching workers install new metal detectors and surveillance cameras. The physical changes to the building were superficial compared to the profound, internal shifts within us. We were different now, bound together by the crucible of what had happened, but also fundamentally changed inside, irrevocably altered. Tyler took my hand, his grip firm, and said, "We survived," and this time, it wasn't a question, a tentative query seeking confirmation. It was a statement of fact, a hard-won realization, imbued with a newfound certainty. That spring, Ben, who had once been the scared kid who almost stayed frozen in his seat, went to the school board meeting and delivered an amazing, powerful speech. His voice, once hesitant, was now strong and clear, resonating with a newfound conviction. He spoke passionately about the critical need to fix the broken system, to overhaul how teacher complaints were handled, to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. He declared, with an unyielding moral clarity, that no student should ever have to pick between their grades and staying alive, inspired by this call to action. I started at State University that fall, majoring in education policy. Someone, I realized, truly needs to fix this stuff. My roommate, thankfully, didn't know about what happened in room 203. And for a few precious weeks, I was just Brianna, simply a college freshman, instead of the shooting girl. It felt incredibly good, a brief respite from the weight of my past. But it also felt profoundly weird keeping that huge, traumatic secret locked deep inside me. In November, they reopened room 203, transforming it into a memorial classroom, a somber space dedicated to remembrance. They asked me to speak at the ceremony, standing exactly where Ms. Brown used to stand felt utterly surreal, a strange echo of a terrifying past. But I told everyone, my voice echoing with the wisdom forged in tragedy, that protecting kids isn't just about implementing physical locks and conducting repetitive drills. It's about something far more fundamental. It's about truly listening when they, with their innate sense of right and wrong, say something is deeply amiss. Mom drove me home for winter break, and as we passed the school, we saw kids playing basketball on the court, their laughter ringing out, their movements carefree, as if nothing catastrophic had ever happened there. I remarked to her that they looked so impossibly young, a stark contrast to the heart and youth we had become. She gently responded that we all looked that young back then, before the world irrevocably shifted. We both knew, with a painful, unspoken certainty, that I would never be that young again. In a sense, that fragile, precious thing was another casualty that day, another part of us that had died in room 203. Tyler and I met at our old coffee shop when we were both home from college for the holidays. The lingering effects of our trauma were still evident. We still instinctively checked where the exits were, our eyes scanning for escape routes, and we still jumped, our hearts momentarily seizing, whenever someone accidentally dropped a tray. But we were learning to live with it, learning to navigate the world with these new, unwelcome instincts. Tyler held my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, and said, with a quiet strength, that we were writing new chapters now. It sounded a little cheesy, perhaps, like a line from a movie, but it was also profoundly, undeniably true. The scars, both visible and invisible, would always be there, a permanent testament to what we endured. But we were more than what happened in room 203. We were more than our trauma. We were the kids who, in the face of unimaginable terror, refused to stay in our seats when standing up, when taking a chance, meant staying alive. Thanks for letting me wonder about all this with you today. It's been quite the journey, asking these difficult questions together. Take care. Like the video.